listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Happy Monday and welcome to The Briefing. You might have seen security guards with guns doing routine patrols of banks, airports or even schools here in Australia. But what about at the front of your home?
You add a firearm into a situation, and as soon as you draw that firearm, it potentially could only go one way.
That deep dive looking into why security guards in one Aussie city are looking to arm themselves with guns by the end of the year, and whether it's actually a good or even a safe idea is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Monday, the 3rd of November.
Hey Chris, and to you listening, political insiders and experts are warning the coalition could be heading for another breakup after the Nationals formally dumped its commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Nationals leader David Littleproud confirmed the unanimous party room decision yesterday after a 3-hour meeting.
I, a little while ago, informed the opposition leader, Sussan Ley, of the National Party's decision to scrap net zero by 2050 and to set a policy platform predicated on principles. Principles about a better, cheaper, fairer way to reduce our emissions and to have an energy policy that'll actually work for Australians. It'll save jobs.
With a focus on cutting power prices, the Nationals have instead set an aspiration to reduce emissions by 30 to 40% by 2035, which is around half the government's current target. Now, the coalition first signed Australia up to net zero back in 2021 when ScoMo was PM and Barnaby Joyce his deputy. Barnaby wasn't in the Nationals party room for this latest decision. He had, though, been putting pressure on them to dump the target for a while. And David Littleproud says the decision didn't mean his party was walking away from reducing emissions.
There'll be puerile arguments that we're climate deniers and we've been left behind. That doesn't advance the intellectual debate in this country at all. I'd rather sit and look the Australian people in the eye and say there is a better, cheaper, fairer way for us to reduce our emissions and being able for you to have a job and to be able to have a lifestyle that Australians have enjoyed for so long. That's political leadership.
Now, this really piles the pressure on, Chris, on opposition leader Sussan Ley, who's now got to decide whether to side with the Nationals' position here or risk breaking up the coalition altogether. And as we know, the Liberal Party still hasn't nailed down its stance on net zero because that policy, along with a bunch of key others, are still under review after their thumping loss of the election.
Yeah, and that's not lost on her, with some Liberal sources telling media that Sussan Ley this week will try to fast-track an announcement on net zero. And it feels like time is ticking, especially at the moment with landmark environmental legislation being debated in Parliament this week, which, you know, the Health Minister on the weekend pretty much said that this is the time for Sussan Ley to put her foot down. And also there's new polling by Newspoll commissioned by The Australian, which shows core support for the coalition is currently at a record low. Support for One Nation is up. That's a trend that we've been seeing, unfolding since the election. But also Sussan Ley's approval rating is now at -33. That's the lowest rating she's had since taking over as party leader. So it is going to be a very, very huge week that we should be keeping our eye on in politics.
A British national has been arrested and charged in the UK after a horrific mass stabbing on a train service travelling to London. According to authorities, the man was on a train that left Doncaster Saturday night UK time, or yesterday morning our time, before he attacked and injured 10 people on board with a knife, leaving 2 with critical injuries, 5 others with serious injuries. And that was the sound of dozens of police cars that were sent to the scene within minutes of the first emergency call being made by passengers on board.
Yeah, and specialist officers were deployed. However, authorities have since confirmed this wasn't a terror attack, and there's no evidence to suggest otherwise. It's been dubbed a major incident, though, with a large-scale multi-agency response expected on the ground over coming days. Police originally told media they had arrested 2 suspects, a 32-year-old and a 35-year-old, both born in the UK. However, that information since been updated to say they now only suspect that one of them was involved.
Yeah, that's right. And that man has since been charged with suspicion of attempted murder, with a video captured by a bystander actually showing him yelling, kill me," while being arrested by police. Now, according to Superintendent John Lovelace, within 8 minutes of police being notified of the incident, they had boarded the train and caught this suspect.
It's a shocking incident, and first and foremost, my thoughts are with the family and friends of those who've been affected,
and those who are injured.
Now, since Prime Minister Keir Starmer's labelled the incident deeply concerning and appalling, while local politicians have really applauded authorities for their swift response, the man is now being questioned by police who are trying to determine what his motive was.
The former Duke of York, who was ripped of his Prince title last week, will now lose his last remaining honorary rank. King Charles is reportedly working to have Andrew Mountbatten Windsor stripped of his Vice Admiral naval title after further revelations that he continued to have contact with disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein after claiming to have cut ties. Andrew's also accused of sexually abusing 17-year-old Virginia Giuffre, a minor who was trafficked by Epstein.
That's right. And last month, a friendly email basically surfaced from the Epstein files between Andrew and the child sex offender, where he actually told Epstein in an email that he'd like to visit him in person and, quote, "will play more soon," which not only demonstrates the strong friendship between the pair, but it also proves that Andrew's previous denials and claims that he'd ceased contact with Epstein are just lies. Now, as well as losing his royal titles, last week the former prince was also removed from the Royal Lodge at Windsor, with ministers now working with the King to see his naval honours removed as well.
He was reportedly given them in 2015 after spending 22 years in the Royal Navy and spending much of the last 2 decades treated as a prince and war hero before these allegations came out, with pressure now mounting for him to lose his military medals as well. According to the UK Defence Secretary, that's a decision for the King to make only. Late last week, Buckingham Palace did actually release a statement announcing the changes to Andrew's titles and housing, where it also sent its thoughts and sympathies to all victims and survivors of abuse. Despite all of this, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor continues to deny the accusations against him.
Back home now, where a Senate inquiry into the Optus 000 outage linked to the deaths of 3 people begins today. The joint initiative of the Greens and the Coalition will see the executives from the telco brought before the public inquiry, including its CEO, CFO and current and former chairman. Now, the chair of Australia's Media and Communications Watchdog, or ACMA, will also be appearing at Parliament House today.
Yeah, and we have heard from Liberal backbencher Sarah Henderson, who's part of the Senate committee. She says she's determined to uncover exactly what went wrong in September when hundreds of Australians couldn't reach 000, saying the inquiry will, quote, uncover the truth and, quote, put fire to the feet of Optus, the government, the regulator and the hapless Minister for Communications. Her words, not mine there. Henderson's now urging Communications Minister Annika Wells to appear before the inquiry, saying no stone will be left unturned, promising those responsible will be held to account.
Yeah, and meantime, we know obviously that Optus has since apologised for this hours-long failure, which was triggered by a routine systems upgrade and went on to disrupt emergency calls in WA, South Australia and parts of New South Wales. But at first it said that only 10 calls had been affected and it turned out to actually be around 600. And it's also not an isolated incident, Chris. Like, there's been 3 major issues with Optus since 2023 that left customers not able to reach 000. This is just the latest.
Yeah, and with the latest incident in September, the one that we're talking about, other issues were also raised, including the fact that Optus only alerted ACMA more than a day after it happened. There was also this email that kind of went to an old email, the wrong email. There were all these things unfolding at the time, including the fact that our communications minister was only told about the outage minutes before Optus's CEO held a very public conference. So pressure is on, especially now ahead of bushfire season, to make sure that our emergency network is A-OK. And, you know, that's something that we're going to be seeing unfolding this week.
And security's set to be tightened ahead of the 3rd and final test of the Rugby League Ashes between Australia and England after a serial pitch invader joined the Kangaroos during the national anthem over the weekend.
I do not know his identity. I'm just guaranteeing you that he is not playing.
Guarantee you, not a player, guys. So it turned out to be a viral English prankster, Daniel Jarvis, who's known for rocking up to games, whether it be cricket matches, footy, the Paris Olympics, wearing the team's apparel, and this time standing alongside and linking arms with Melbourne Storm's Cameron Munster.
I literally thought it was some package or some guy got the opportunity to obviously have a bit of a chat and jump in there with the anthem with us. And then
you were cuddling him, though.
Yeah, he asked me to jump between me and Paddy.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, they were cuddling there. They really were. Jarvis did initially try and squeeze in between Munster and teammate Paddy Carrigan, but apparently Cameron Munster and Paddy Carrigan have this superstition that they have to stand next to each other during the anthem, so they wouldn't let him in there. So that's why you'll see the awkward footage of this Pitch Invader just chilling on the end of the road. So weird. But look, the Kangaroos went on to win the game, beating England 14-4, sealing their Ashes victory ahead of the final test next Sunday. Thoughts on Pitch Invaders, Tara? Because I just happen to love one. I love watching security scramble and fall over themselves trying to catch them. It is honestly one of my favourite things to watch on the internet.
Yeah, me too. And a bit of free halftime, or in this instance, pre-game entertainment. I think as long as it's harmless, like who cares? I think it's funny. And I don't remember the last time I've seen one in Australia, so I thought this was very exciting. But what do you guys think? We'll chuck a question up in our broadcast channel behind the briefing. And remember, if you're not in the group already, you can join us via the link in our Instagram bio. Would love to hear what you think on this one. Now, that does bring our headlines to a close for today, but coming up next is Chris's deep dive on the private security guards looking to arm themselves with guns during neighbourhood patrols, why they're doing it, whether it's safe, and could it actually help? Stick around for that deep dive coming up next.
Have you ever walked or driven down a suburban street at night and seen private security guards doing patrols? It could be the ones repping high-vis and walkie-talkies, or the ones doing happy laps in their branded hatchbacks. Even if you haven't, it's an increasingly common thing across parts of the country. And now, some of the guards being paid for those patrols are looking to arm themselves with guns in a major city that's recently caught the attention of opposition leader Sussan Ley.
Melbourne has gone from the most livable city to the crime capital of Australia.
Now, the latest crime stats kind of back her up, but not entirely. Melbourne's the crime capital of Victoria, not Australia, with rates up 17% compared to last year and youth offending near doubling in some outer suburbs. But when we account for things like population growth, per capita crime in Melbourne is actually down when compared to, say, 2017. Graeme Simpfendorfer is a former detective with Vic Police and is the founder and CEO of Peregrine Investigations and Consultancy. Graeme, welcome to the briefing. Why are more security companies wanting to arm their guards in Melbourne at the moment?
I think what's happening down there in Melbourne is the level of frustration that I guess these companies and organisations are feeling through the increasing crime, and more so the violent crime that's happening in and around their businesses. It just highlights that frustration that they're having. There's property loss, people are worried and concerned about their own safety, and just, I guess, being in the street and being in around the city areas or some of these other outer suburbs where those increases in violent attacks and or thefts are occurring. So it's almost like, what's our next step to help protect ourselves, protect our customers and protect their staff? There's an obligation on the employer, obviously, to protect their staff, and we've seen that with a number of the larger organisations that either have these offenders storm their businesses or, machete attacks or gang rivalries happening at their businesses as a location in public. So I guess there is a point of duty of care to the employer around the staff and security and welfare of their own people. And the security guard that is there at the front is very vulnerable. They're unarmed and all they are doing is observing. And these gangs know that. So they storm these premises en masse, and there's nothing the security guard can do. So I understand the frustration and the reason why they're considering arming them, because that is a deterrent. They'll look to go elsewhere where there is not a guard that is armed.
When it comes to these residential patrols or these neighbourhood patrols, we know of at least 3 estates in Melbourne's west that, the residents are paying for private security guards to go through and do that at the moment.
We're dealing with stolen cars, we're dealing with offenders, we're dealing with groups of 6 to 8 at a time that are coming out to cause harm and cause trouble. We're being confronted with machetes, brass knuckles and groups of offenders that aren't out there to play games.
That was Grant Burton from YPG Risk speaking to the ABC there. But Graeme, what are some of the reasons that come to your mind that could explain why violent incidents like those are unfolding in Melbourne's outer west at the moment?
The residents are frustrated. The patrols that used to be there probably way back in the day when police numbers were a lot higher, you would see the visible presence of police as a deterrent to a lot of these violent gangs and or home invasions. And the sad fact and the reality is that they're just not there at the moment due to staffing and or demands elsewhere, because it's prioritisation, right? The police have got to go where the issues are. So the residents are taking matters into their own hands. So I can't blame them in that context. However, that comes with a significant amount of risk. They're not trained, they're not probably legislated to protect themselves to a degree and putting themselves in harm's way. But I think it highlights the level of frustration that these communities are facing.
What are some of the things that your typical security guard that's doing neighbourhood patrols at the moment is arming themselves with? It's not firearms, typically. What are some of the equipment or weapons that they can have on hand?
Predominantly, it's just their vehicle and observations, perhaps body-worn cameras. I've experienced those and the integration of body-worn cameras through my time as a police officer, and I could confidently say that that item or that piece of equipment alone does act as a deterrent, because people realise they're being recorded and all of their actions, all of their words are being recorded for someone to view how they act down the track. So body-worn cameras, sometimes tracking devices as to where these security guards are. But in terms of weapons, you may see some with a baton, but that's, again, a regulated weapon. It does require authorisation to carry as well.
When it comes to the legalities of security guards carrying weapons, we do know that they can't carry weapons like capsicum spray or tasers in the state of Victoria, but they can apply to carry guns. What type of guns are we talking here?
Depends on what that licence is. So it's generally it's termed a cash-in-transit licence, but that effectively means anything of high value or risk. So, look, it can be really anything they're protecting. However, the type of guns that they'll be using generally would be firearms of a sidearm nature, of a smaller calibre. It's a convoluted process. It's certainly not an easy one, and it's not a simple one. And rightly, it shouldn't be. It needs to be quite heavily regulated, and it is. It's a fit and proper person to hold a firearms licence in the state of Victoria. So there's a lot of checks and balances and regulation in place there. So it's not easy. It's a certificate of security, and then you need to demonstrate the need and the requirement for that firearm licence. And it's not a quick process. It's not an overnight thing. It takes a long time to go through that process, and so it should.
How confident do you think the public can be in the process that these security guards have to go through to become armed guards? I mean, having a quick look of the courses that are available, given someone is a certified private security guard or a private security operator and they do have a firearms license, they can get themselves qualified to become armed guards within as little as 19 days. Do you think that's enough to kind of instill some confidence in the public here?
Look, I've seen the course and I've experienced it myself, so I can confidently say that it's not a tick and flick. It's very regulated. It's very, you've actually got to point and shoot, pass a marksmanship component, as well as understand the laws and regulations of carrying the firearm. So it is very rigorous. I think the community can have a lot of confidence in how it's being regulated. I think the community can definitely feel safe as to who is carrying them, has passed all the relevant checks and balances to have that firearm on their hip. But I think there's a broader question as to, is this the answer? Is this the solution? And I'm not 100% sold on that yet myself.
What do you think the solution is in this space?
The firearm issue or the firearm carrying itself isn't just it. We're seeing those violent attacks, antisocial behaviour, and it's a deterrent. So in the good old days, a security guard would just observe and report to police and call police. But police are so overwhelmed these days that response time, the offenders know, is significant enough for them to flee an area. So security guards are going to be the first person on the ground that witnesses a crime or sees a violent confrontation between people. So I think it's more than just arming the guards. It's a solution. It's more collaboration between police and the private sector. But that's not an easy thing to do.
So when we take it to the next level of, having these security guards walking around with guns, hypothetically, we have had some legal experts in the last week kind of describe it as a recipe for disaster. I know you did mention the rigorous training processes that security guards do go through to carry firearms. However, they have been raising red flags over this idea that security guards aren't as equipped or understand the techniques of de-escalation as well as police officers do. What's your response to criticisms like that?
Look, I think they're valid to a degree. You add a firearm into a situation, and as soon as you draw that firearm, it potentially could only go one way. But as you rightly say, there's a lot of training that goes on with police around de-escalation, escalation, de-escalation. It's a wheel. It's not a one pathway to a resolution. You've got to be able to adapt and communicate. So I'm not sure that is the answer if that's what they're looking to achieve. I think it's more around support and collaboration and education for crime prevention that needs to come in the first place. Firearms highlights the level of frustration that's being felt in the community because they feel that they're safer with that weapon being on their hip, and that can deter these groups from coming into the area in the first place. But I'm not sold that's the answer. I think that probably creates more problems than what it's worth.
Graeme, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That was security expert and former detective with Vic Police, Graeme Simpfendorfer, speaking with me there. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. If you learned something new in this episode, why not flick it over to a mate? And while you're there, feel free to leave us a rate and a review. I'm Spyrou. I'll catch you next time.